Emabhaceni kangiqomi kwaZulu ngoba ngiqomi emabhaceni kangiqomi kwaZulu ngoba ngiqomi emabhaceni ngiqomi kwaZulu ngoba ngiqomi. Good morning and welcome to Sisters at 8. Yay, that music gave me life because we need that life, or I needed that life for myself today. My name is Jan Robinson Flint. I'm the Executive Director of Black Women for Wellness. The program you are tuned into is Sisters at 8. Yes, I know it's 9 a.m. It used to be 6, but we got stretched a little. Perhaps we'll go back to 8 at some point soon because our day is starting much earlier these days. Black Women for Wellness is in California. We welcome our audience from across and around the globe, especially our folks in South Africa today. We are talking about the lives of Desmond Tutu and Martin Luther King Jr. One was born in 29, one was born in 31. They both received Nobel Peace Prizes. They both were very much involved with a Black liberation theology in 2 different countries. And we'd like to explore how that is happening. So Black Women for Wellness is located on the web at bwwla.org. We're also on Facebook at Black Women for Wellness. And if you feel moved, please share this link or share our link and hit us and tag us on Facebook so other people get an opportunity to hear this conversation this morning. I'm very excited about the speakers. Our moderator is Reverend Kelvin Sauls, who was born and raised on the south side of Johannesburg, but more on that later. Our agenda today usually starts with hot topics, and today we will start with hot topics. Hot topics is how we do news, the news that Black folks are paying attention to across the world. Then we'll have our speakers and we'll do announcements and then we'll close it out. We'll have a little music, but just to pepper it out a little bit. So welcome to Black Women for Wellness. Thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned and tag someone. And with that, I'm gonna pass it to Kim Robinson to start us out with hot topics and introduce us to that other office of Black Women for Wellness in Stockton, California.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jan. So as Jan mentioned, my name is Kim Robinson. I am the community liaison for Black Women for Wellness, and I am in our Stockton location. We opened up the Stockton location in December of 2019, and our operations are similar to those of our LA office in terms of the services that we offer. We are located in South Stockton in the Dorothy L. Jones Community Center. And we also, in collaboration with our Black Women for Wellness Action Project, we also offer support and help out with policy and in the policy work that we do in Sacramento and throughout California and out of California as well. And so some of the services, like I mentioned, that we offer, one that I really wanted to highlight is our Kitchen Divas program. We in Stockton offer food to those who are having food insecurities, and we do that twice a month. And we were fortunate to be able to work with an organization out of Lodi called Grace and Mercy, and they supply us with our food for that program. And some hot topics that I wanted to share that kind of also connects us with South Africa is that Grace and Mercy has started a program that offers food to not only the children in Korea, but they also offer food to the orphanages that are there. And so to date, they have served 400 students, children that are in the schools, and 200 children and families that are in the orphanages. One way that Grace and Mercy kind of stimulates the economy there is by offering employment. They opened an office there, and they are employing local residents. And then they also, in order to get the food, they work with local bean growers. They also work with local organizations that supplies rice and other produce locally. So it's a wonderful program. You can go on their website to get more information. It's Grace and Mercy Foundation of Lodi. And I'm really happy to be able to collaborate with them and also offer food to our local residents in Stockton as well. So I will pass it on back on over to Jan. That's our hot topic from Stockton, California.
Thanks, Kim. We appreciate you, and we are looking forward to making more connections. If Black Women for Wellness in Stockton can be connected with Grace and Mercy in Kenya, absolutely we can figure out how we're going to be making more connections in South Africa, for example, or Southern Africa. And really look into how Black women and Black people are being living in around the world. I did try to turn my camera on, and there we go. I'll try harder, and it won't stay. I don't know why. Okay, there we go. So let me introduce you to the curator of our conversation today, Pastor Kelvin Sauls. Born and raised on the south side of Johannesburg, South Africa, Pastor Sauls is a faith-rooted community organizer and senior fellow with the Atlantic Institute with a focus on transnational racial equity. He is the former director for interfaith partnerships with community health councils and the former senior pastor at Holman United Methodist Church in South Los Angeles. I will say that one of the things that Reverend Saul and I met, or one of the places that we met, was doing environmental justice work right here on Adams Boulevard in Los Angeles. And I'm gonna add one other thing to his bio. He is a board member for Black Women for Wellness Action Project. And that is the first reproductive justice 501c4 in California, if not the country. He also hosts and produces a podcast called Faith Without Borders and is a regular columnist with the Los Angeles Sentinel. He currently serves as the chief catalyst for his newly launched platform, People Bridging, with his theory of change as when people mobilize to otherwise, we must organize to humanize. His mission is to seek alignment and strategic community partners to effectuate agency and capacity to organize spiritual resistance and moral reimaginations toward the realization of planetary liberation. Ooh, big words there. I like it. Today, Pastor Sauls is humbled and excited to join us at this transnational, transformational, and we hope inspirational intersection of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Moreover, to moderate this conversation with three powerful prophetic faith healers, or maybe two, in tribute and testimony amid tumultuous and perilous times. Reverend Sauls, I am passing the baton to you.
Thank you, my sister. And Jan is now grandmother Jan. So I don't know what your grandchild calls you. Can you remind me again? There's a name.
He's not calling me anything yet. He's just making a whole lot of noise.
Okay, that's good. I can still influence. I can still get into that. I can still get into.
We can influence him. He's learning so fast. But don't get me started on being a grand. He was 5 months old yesterday.
Oh my God. Yes. Well, beloved, welcome. It is so good to be here with you. And I want to acknowledge our leader, Jan Robinson Flint at the Black Women for Wellness, dear sister and friend and comrade in the struggle on so many levels and in so many spaces. Just want to appreciate you, my sister. All of the staff at Black Women for Wellness, you all are my kin, and you know that, and just appreciate who you are and what you're doing. And for the team here putting together today's Sisters at 8, thank you for the prep work you've done. I know what all goes into pulling these together, and it's been a joy to partner with you just for this extraordinary, experience, and looking forward to it. Let me further just say that it is just exciting for me, here on the eve of commemorating the life, legacy, and ministry of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that we can find ourselves right here at this intersection where we are going to be hanging out with Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to try and somehow see how we can join them on their journey through revolutionary change, and in turn, listen to how they've embodied, their vocation, their call, and in addition to that, in that listening, hopefully we can learn, some aspects of their journey, and then leverage it for what it is that they are charging us today for such a time as this, right here in the United States of America, as well as in South Africa, and indeed, the world, because, of the work that they didn't just do, right, but they embodied. And this embodiment will certainly come out as we, share with two dynamic panelists who are walking in the path of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Archbishop Desmond Tutu in the work that they are doing, not just in their congregations, but also in their communities. These two leaders are both prophetic and progressive and are committed to liberation. And that's what these two ancestors were about. We were going to have 3, but Pastor Temekila Cole Smart wasn't able to join us, and we know that we'll catch you on the rebound as they are preparing SCLC Southern California for they're in the middle of King Week, and we know lots going on, and so we grant her grace, and we're looking forward to our ongoing work together. Reverend Vanessa McKenzie is my sister, and born and raised in South Africa. She's currently the rector at the Church of the Advent. That's the Episcopal Church right here in Los Angeles, or I should say South Los Angeles, because she was just down the street from me. So we were holding up both ends of West Adams, in an Ubuntu Sawubona kind of a way. And she is a dear sister, and one who has just been touched in so many ways by Archbishop Tutu, and she'll share part of that, with us today. It's so good to have her with us. And Vanessa, love you and appreciate you, my sister, and and all the times that we're both busy, but whenever we get together, it's like, we were just talking yesterday. So glad you made time out of your busy schedule to be with us, and looking forward to our time together. And then Reverend Kamal Hassan, my brother from another mother, straight out of Richmond, California, my old stomping ground right there in the East Bay. I appreciate you, my brother. We were together yesterday for another event with the Faith Initiative, and Pastor Hassan was deeply and deliberately engaged, in the conversation. And I sent him a direct message saying, I'm looking forward to tomorrow, man. So welcome. He is the Minister of Word and Sacrament at Sojourner Truth Presbyterian Church in Richmond, California. And as I said, these two congregations, these two pastors are known for their prophetic and progressive work in liberation and community transformation. So they're not just about preserving the four walls of the church, but indeed to engage in the preservation of community by way of systems change for racial equity. Welcome, welcome. It's so good to see both of you and have you with us. And I'm ready for this conversation, I'm telling you. But let's start just by maybe hearing some greetings from you, so we can at least, get familiarity with your voices, because here pretty soon, we're going to go deep. So I'm going to start with Reverend Mackenzie. Just greet us in your own way. I'm not asking any questions, but just greet us, and I'm going to ask, Pastor Hassan to do the same. Rev Vanessa.
Sawubona, I see you. Goeiemorgen, Timelang. Good morning. It's just so great to be here. The word says where two or three are gathered, not in the same place, but in Jesus' name, there he is. And so it is so wonderful that we can gather under the canopy of God's love and the presence of the Spirit. So thank you for this kind invitation today.
Yeah. So you can see us, but we cannot see you. We see a beautiful picture of you, but we need you live, my sister.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
There we are. There we are. See, now you know why, because look at them colors, y'all.
Yeah.
Welcome, welcome. Pastor, just some words of greeting from you.
Oh, for sure. Sawubona. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. So honored and glad to be here with folks I've known for a long, long time, as well as new friends. I remember the beginning of Black Women for Wellness, and Jan and I have been co-conspirators for quite a long time. Good to be with you again, Pastor Sauls, and I certainly look forward to this conversation with Reverend Vanessa as well.
All right, all right. Let me refer all of us to an article that I wrote that was published in the Los Angeles Sentinel, celebrating the life of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I want to just read some words from that. And then I'm going to go ahead and invite our panelists to dig straight up in. I wrote, the vociferous voice of the voiceless has taken his final breath. Archbishop Desmond Mpilo Tutu was part of the greatest generation that bequeathed us a liberated South Africa. Also known as the Arch, he embodied the message and meaning of Ubuntu, the essence of inherent deep human connectedness sparked by deliberate divine love, compassion, and peace. At just 5 feet 5 inches, This former teacher stood tall as a bold prophet and priest who organized and mobilized against the tyranny of institutionalized racial hatred perpetuated by white supremacy, the politics of exclusion, and religious nationalism. The systemic vices of life under apartheid were no match for his spiritual resistance, nor his reimagined vision of a rainbow nation. Even after the end of white minority rule, his progressive and independent-minded disposition never wavered in his fight for a fairer and more inclusive democratic South Africa. We could have, read or write those same words, about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so that's why we are meeting right here at the intersection with them, and to see how we can join this journey of revolutionary change with love at the center of it. So let's start with Reverend Mackenzie. Would you share with us just, how you have experienced, Archbishop Tutu as he was, traveling on this journey of, liberation, this journey of revolutionary change in South Africa as a pastor, as a priest, as a pastor, two pastors, right? As a prophet. If you would just kick us off by just sharing some thoughts around that, please.
Thank you. Many stories will be told of the Arch in months and years to come as we remember and celebrate his life and his legacy. I've been privileged to have worked with him when he was General Secretary of South African Council of Churches in 1978. I was still a young person at the time. There was a time when we were young, we can all say that. Many of us have many stories that we treasure of our experience with him and our journey with him. Some of those are deeply personal, but some of those we are happy to share. It is a gift of grace from God to know that Desmond Mpilo Tutu has formed and informed and shaped my life personally, and there are so many that can say that. One of the ways in which he has shaped me is his faith-rootedness. And he was not just, he is, I don't want to talk about him in the past tense. He is a prophet, 20th century prophet, as we all say, a priest, but he was a man of deep, deep devotion. He had a real, authentic, godly life of prayer. He used to say, we have to have a life of prayer because we cannot do the work of God without having a relationship with the God of the works. There is a sense in which he almost constantly kept himself connected to the power source. That's why in his whole journey, we never saw him complain about compassion fatigue, because God doesn't get fatigued. And so if we constantly go to that well, and we constantly get refreshed and nourished and renewed as we continue. And so that is the first thing about him that helped me. He had a life of disciplined prayer. It didn't matter whether we were in an airplane, whether we were in a hotel room, whether we were at synod, in a meeting. He would have morning prayer. At 12 noon, we would stop for the Angelus in Roman Catholic and Anglican tradition, and then he would have evening prayer, and he would just call upon you to read. He used to say, the motto of the Boy Scout should be the motto of a Christian: always be prepared. You never know when God is going to call upon you to do something. And so he's being anchored in God really helped him to help us. Because one of the things is that he helped me very early on, and many of us in South Africa, to see our value. He used to say to us, God loves you, in only a way that he could. And he embodied that love. And he lived that love, because love is a doing word. Love is a verb. Love is not an emotion or a feeling. And he would tell us that God loves us and that we are VIPs. The first time he said that, we were looking around, looking at which celebrities are here. And he said, we are all very important people. And to hear that reinforced again and again, living in a system that dehumanized you, and you having this man of God that tells you again and again how special you are, how valuable you are, and how God loves you, that helped to create in me personally, and so many of us, a very healthy sense of self-worth and self-knowledge, and eventually self-affirmation, because he used to say, remember who you are and whose you are. Remember who you are and to whom you belong. And so that was his love is the most universal, it is the most powerful force in the world. And he lived that love in his life. We all know he had an amazing sense of humor. If you want to know how he stayed so healthy, is because he knew that laughter is the best medicine. At one time in South Africa, some white person said, oh, you know, Black people, our brains don't work fast enough. We don't remember things, and therefore we cannot be in positions of power in any sphere, whether it's political, whether it's economic, and whether it's in the church. And then the next few days we were together at a meeting with him, and he said, oh, you know what happened? I was at a meeting last week, and somebody told this joke, and I only remembered it a week later when I was in the shower. And so we all laughed, because remembering and this is the thing, make fun of those who try to get at you, because then what happens is you don't get sucked into their issues, and that you keep focused in terms of what you are supposed to do. So he was a man of prayer. He had a tremendous sense of humor, but he also taught me to show strength in vulnerability. Was able to weep when he had to weep with people, and to weep like Jesus over Jerusalem, because he wept over South Africa in the corruption in post-independence, when some of our leaders were so corrupt. He wept for us and for our country. He wept when we traveled to Rwanda in 1995 after the genocide. He wept when we cast our first vote, him at his age, I at mine, in 1994. He wept during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, knowing that you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. He wept at those. And so he showed the strength that, guess what? Tears is not a lack of faith, but it's a sign of love. Because when you love deeply, and then you are moved in your being to express that. His passion for justice is absolutely undeniable, that there should never be nobody, whether you're young or old, Black or white, male or female, gay or straight, nobody is excluded in the kingdom, KINDOM, in the kingdom of God, in the reign of God. Nobody is excluded. We are all, like Pastor Saul says, Ubuntu. I am because you are, and you are because I am. And he used to say, we have to work to make the human race the human family, because we are all interdependent. And so his struggle for justice, particularly for us as women, our place, not only in the struggle, but our place in the church. He used to say to us, you don't just have a seat at the table, you have a voice, and you must use that voice. You must use that voice, you must speak. I was telling Pastor Sauls, he used to say to us, don't be backward in coming forward. You have to stand up, show up, and speak up. He was so amazing. Whenever we traveled, the delegation always had to reflect the demographics of South Africa. You had to have an X amount of white people, Black people, young people, women, people of different sexual persuasions, even different political persuasions. He used to say, from Bush to Biden, we all part of God's family. And so nobody is excluded. It is absolutely, I am moved that we are at this intersection, but this intersection of where do we choose to go? Because the baton had been passed. The ordination of women would not have happened in South Africa had it not been for this great tree that has fallen. Because he existed, we exist in the way that we do today. The great Maya Angelou, I can't wait to get my quarter and keep that as a keepsake, because he believed that God, it is God who calls, God who equips, God who transforms, God who renews, and that God invites us into that vision, and God invites everybody. I remember traveling with him to Rwanda. I remember traveling with him to the Lambeth Conference in 1988. I remember traveling with him to see the ANC in exile in the early 80s. My dad, who was a bishop, worked with him from 1988 until my dad retired in 1988 until my dad retired more than 10 years later. It was Bishop Desmond that changed even the way the church operated, because he started appointing Black priests to white congregations, and that had not happened. He was unafraid. And so when the Beatitudes in Matthew says, blessed are those who are persecuted, the arch was persecuted. When he became the first Black bishop in Johannesburg, the white people said, we're going to apply sanctions to the church. When he became archbishop, they say, we're going to withhold our money. And the arch, in his typical fashion, said, you can leave and you can take your money with you. So unafraid he was. And so that he wasn't threatened in that. He was persecuted because twice the South African government tried to assassinate him, twice. And thank God they did not succeed. He was maligned. He was maligned by the media, sometimes by people in their own church. And I know now, even in the time when Dr. Martin Luther King was alive, he was maligned and persecuted. And now, years later, they see what he was and who he was. And so the arch was persecuted, but he is just, we know that he wrote books about forgiveness. He didn't just talk the talk, he walked that. He is just such a forgiving person. I have never known him to harbor anybody in his heart. He used to say, I am not going to be an enemy of an unforgiving spirit. I'm not going to quote his books. I don't have to quote his books because he lived it. He lived it. He lived forgiveness. He embodied it. Some of us, when Madiba came out and he went to have tea with the architect of apartheid's widow, Mrs. Verwoerd, we couldn't understand that he could do that, and that him together with the arch began to talk about how there has to be healing in forgiveness, because that is the only way in which we can move forward. And so that for me is the powerful message. You know, he used to say the two hardest words in English is to say, I'm sorry, because people don't say that enough and mean it. And that's why it was important that he was part of and that he chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Yeah. He was a peacemaker, not just a peace lover, but a peacemaker. He stood in the gap. He prevented a bloodshed in South Africa after elections and before elections, during CODESA, and a negotiated settlement. And I'm just going to end by saying, honest to God, as Pastor Saul says, his value of Ubuntu, he believed that we are community, but he was able to say we are community and yet still within that Ubuntu, hold up the belief that each person is uniquely and wonderfully made. And that for me is the value, that not to choose between community and individualism, but how those two hang together. That he believed that community is important, but even within that, each person is wonderfully made. He used to make a joke to say, we are all special because God don't make junk. And so that, and God doesn't reproduce. He used to say, God is not into mass production. We are each individually and wonderfully made. And so for me, as painful as his death is, that I thought the minute I heard it, I got a call that just before Christmas that he was responding to God's call, because when your name is called, you cross the river. That I thought it's the end of the era of great leaders. And then in my prayer time, it was God was reminding me, no, it's the end of a chapter. And the pen, that is the power of the pen, is in our hands so that we can write the chapters of this book, because this book of the struggle for justice, for peace, for fairness, for forgiveness, for love, for transformation, for healing is still being written. And so how do we become agents of transformation? A great tree has fallen, as I said, and I am better, and I can be better because he was. And I just wanted to share those just
Yeah.
was an amazing man. That's all I can.
Amen. Wow. I know we can go on forever. Thank you so much. And I know that all comes from the heart, my sister, and really, really appreciate it. I mean, one of the things that you said as we transition to Pastor Hassan and his reflection on Dr. King, and then later on, we're going to pull it all together as we allow these two ancestors now to listen to us at the intersection, because they never met, but we're going to try and introduce them to each other at this intersection, right? But the piece that you mentioned was just his deep, a sense of commitment, to the God of the work, right? And also the embodiment, right, of what it means, to be Ubuntu, just as Dr. King did with what it means to be, a beloved community. And so, Pastor Hassan, yesterday you said something very, very powerful, in saying that, for the next couple of days, we will see the conveniently chosen, ways in which Dr. King will be remembered, the Chick-fil-A way, the NBA way, the NFL way, right? And all these commercialized ways that in so many ways clouds the courageous spirit, of who Dr. King, really was. Vincent Harding, writes in his book, The Inconvenient Hero, that not only did America not read the entire I Have a Dream speech, which he never titled, right? That was given that title, you see. And then on the other hand, as you said yesterday, right after that march and that speech, they kind of tried to put him in a time capsule. And you and I know so much happened, after that, as he sought to connect racial justice, economic justice, and social justice. So would you just share in your own way, just around, the depth and breadth of who Dr. King was, and how can that be both inspirational as well as instructive for us for such a time as this?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and certainly much gratitude and thanksgiving to Reverend Vanessa for that amazing recalling and representing of the life and legacy and ministry of the Archbishop Tutu. Unlike her, I did not know Dr. Martin Luther King personally. I was a child when his ministry was going on, living in California. During that time, I think I may have been 11 years old when he was assassinated. And I do remember that as a very sad day. And I remember my mother crying quite heavily when we received the news, and also watching the funeral on television and witnessing her tears once again because of how Martin had fallen so early in life. But certainly a very significant life that continues to inspire and instruct us. As to what you were saying, yes, typically what happens during this time of year in the United States is that the corporate image, the corporate filtered image of Martin Luther King's words and work predominate in the United States. And there are now and will be programs throughout the next 3 to 4 days of all kinds of stripes and intentions that tend to freeze his life and his work at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1965, where he gave the speech. And as you rightly and correctly said, was not titled, "I Have a Dream." And actually, that was a riff. He wasn't actually intending to use it, but I think it was Mahalia Jackson began to, near the time he was ending the speech, talk about your dream, talk about your dream, talk about your dream. And then he just kind of improvised, right, to say that part about, I have a dream, and all of the things that were added with that. But prior to that, and even now, the speech could have been called "America has given Black people a bounce check written on the Bank of Freedom," because he did say that, right? That the check of freedom that America has written to Black people has been returned marked insufficient funds. That could have been the title of the speech too, right? The speech also could have been entitled, "Let's Free the Black Nation in the South," because he encouraged everyone there. He says, go back to the South, go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, and fight the good fight of freedom, right? I mean, the speech could have been called that too.
Mm-hmm.
But organizing the people for liberation and the destruction of Jim Crow does not help the US empire's intentions for the lives of Black people, or for any people in the United States, right? Showing America's hypocrisy, itself the land of the free, of the brave, and consistently being cowardly in its denial of freedom for people of color and poor people of all colors in the United States. That makes him, as the wonderful title of a wonderful book that you mentioned by Vincent Harding, an inconvenient hero. And this is why the state and the mainstream media and the empire need to freeze Martin Luther King's name and legacy at 1965. Because after that, those 3 years that he lived between 65 and 68, he became more and more and more inconvenient because of the stands he took, because of the struggles he fought, because of the people he committed himself to, and his way of doing Christianity, which dare not separate itself from the political, economic, and social realities of poor people, right? His last act was the Poor People's Campaign, in which he united poor people of all races in a movement to come to Washington, D.C., and again expose the hypocrisy of the quote unquote American dream and the reality that people of color and poor people and women and children were living in this so-called United States. So Martin grew. I have to confess, in my political development as a young person, I grew up as a revolutionary New African nationalist, and still that's kind of my superstructure. So we were fairly critical of Martin King during my young adult years. We certainly much preferred Malcolm X to him. We couldn't imagine allowing white people to go upside our head and not doing nothing about it. And in many cases, we couldn't even imagine loving white people or trying to live in harmony with them. And so we were critical of Martin King. We counterposed him and Malcolm. But later on in my life, you know, as I re-embraced my Christian self, I studied Martin more, I listened to him more. I was inspired and instructed by him. I still am. And I have evolved in my understanding of who he was, what he stood for, what he did. And he is now one of my patron saints and models for ministry. And I embraced the love ethic that he taught. You know, I don't, and I know the poison that hate can do when we allow others, because of what they have done, to cause us to hate them. It doesn't mean I'm not angry. I think anger is righteous. And I think Martin was fairly angry himself. But the hatred part, that's what destroys.
Mhm.
And so I've come to understand and respect and love who he is and what he stood for. One of the things he showed us, and Sister talked about courage, right? Dr. King had a lot of courage, right? Because if you look at the trajectory of his life when he was called to serve at the Dexter Avenue Church, that was a upper middle class Black congregation, fairly well off for Black people at the time. And they also saw themselves as kind of like a silk stocking, hoity-toity kind of people. They didn't, you know, they bragged about how many doctors and lawyers and so on, professional college educated people were members of the congregation, and they kind of turned their noses down on the less well-off folks who were struggling. So what was marked out for Martin was kind of a cushy life of a preacher in a fairly well-off church. And he had come from a middle class life. So the path of least resistance was marked out for him, right? But he didn't go that way. He had the courage to understand the meaning of the gospel of Jesus, who said that he had been anointed to preach good news to the poor.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
At liberty those who were captive,
Yeah.
to make the oppressed go free,
Mm-hmm.
recovery of sight to the blind, the year of the Lord's favor, which means canceling the debts of those who owed the landlords who had stolen their land, and the returning of the stolen ancestral land. That was what energized and motivated him, and those people at Dexter did not like it. They ended up, you know, firing him. And that is why he went back to Atlanta, back to Ebenezer, and co-pastored with his dad.
Yeah.
Wow.
But he didn't stop there, right?
Right. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The people in the Montgomery Improvement Association grabbed him up and made him the head of the organization, the voice of the organization, so that because the white city fathers there had not gotten their hooks in him like they had so many others in that city. And then he learned about the power of grassroots folks who had organized that city and were ready to step off with this bus boycott even before he got there.
Yeah.
And so he allowed himself also to transform, right? He learned from the masses, from the situation of the masses of people, from the struggles that they were fighting that were quite different from what he was used to as a child and even as a man, because he was in a different class position. But he didn't allow that position to water down his faith or slow down his ministry.
Yeah.
And so because he was willing to spend time with those who were struggling, who did not have the advantages and privileges he had access to, much like Jesus, right? Jesus comes to earth and he spends so much time with people on the margin that they change him. They help him to have his heart pure and soft for those whom are outcasts and are turned away, even by their own.
Yeah.
He learns this from them, and then he spreads it, right? So King does this too. And so by the time he's at Washington, D.C., yes, there's all these people that's like 250,000 people who were there. That was probably the height of his quote unquote public popularity, because the stance he took afterward made it plunge.
Mhm.
I'm talking about courage. It would have been so easy for him to just be a celebrity after that.
Mhm.
To just go on talk shows and make a lot of money at speaking engagements and, write these little puffy, fluffy books and, today would be king merchandise, t-shirts and hats and shoes and blah, 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 blah. It would have been so easy for him to do that, but he didn't do it. Because the Spirit had anointed him to preach good news to the poor. Had called him to be Moses. That's what he said, his last night of life.
Yeah.
With you. He was saying he was Moses. Because he had stayed true to the faith. God had allowed him, he said, I was given a privilege. Took me up and allowed me to look over into the promised land.
Yes, sir.
And I've seen, he said, he held that I've seen the promised land.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, he did. That's what he said. We as a people will get to the promised land.
Yeah.
After he came out against the Vietnam War, he was persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very possibly why he was assassinated. One of the last interviews he did was on NBC, and you can find it on YouTube. And he's standing in what looks like a stairwell of a church. And this reporter, who was fairly well known back then, Sander Van Oker, is talking to him about his new program. This out now, check this out. His new program, okay? And so he says, can you tell us about it, Dr. King? And, we know you because of your I Have a Dream, and we really appreciate that. And then King stops him and goes, well, I've been doing a lot of thinking since then. And at this point in my life, I have come to believe that my talk about I have a dream was superficial optimism.
Mm.
Mm.
I'm gonna say that again because I know you don't believe me.
Yes, sir.
He said that I have a dream metaphor, that vision I talked about, was superficial optimism. Because since then, I've become more acquainted with the nightmare.
Mm.
that poor people are living in.
My Lord.
And so we have to do more. We have to unite people across the various lines. We have to support workers because the poverty is killing this country. And we have to oppose the three triplets that are dragging down the American society: racism, materialism, and violence. And he starts speaking about the war. Courage, transformation, refusing to waver under persecution, because when he took these stances, people inside of the Black community and outside, he faced a torrent of criticism. In fact, the pollsters say that, you know, at the time he was assassinated, only 33% of people in the country supported what he was doing.
Mm.
And that sounds impossible given all the fanfare that we get now around Martin Luther King, when it appears everybody always loved him. Not so. Not so. So one of the things that happens, this is that, I've been talking a minute, so one of the things that happens that he embodies here is this kind of loop of closeness to God because of those who engage in the struggle, right? There's a certain loop that happens. So for example, at the beginning, Martin just wanted to oppose the segregation law and get voting rights for Black folks. And he believed that the system could work for that, and that all you had to do was fix it, right? You have legislation and you have are not aware of what they're doing and the impact it's having on folks, and then you show them that, and then their consciousness is raised, and then they move to change what's wrong. But he found that whatever you engaged in, even though it was nonviolent, I mean, that was the other part, right? All that meant was you got more opposition from the state and from the military and the monetary. They all opposed you, no matter what you were trying to do or how you were trying to do it. So that meant that you were persecuted, and that meant that you had to drive yourself to your knees to pray to God to develop that relationship closer and closer, because you realized that this was way over you, and you could not, as Reverend Vanessa was saying, you can't do this without God. It's too big. Even with you and the people, it's too big. So that drives you closer into this divine relationship, this divine communication between you and your maker. And then you receive the strength and the power you need to keep on keeping on. And then you do, and then the reaction comes at you again and knocks you down and drives you deeper into this relationship with the divine than you would have ever gone if these things had never happened to you. And that is how people like he and Bishop Tutu, why they were so close to God. They had the scars to prove it.
Yeah.
I was just watching Winnie Mandela's national funeral, and her assistant, Sister Zodwa, quoted Winnie as saying, "I feel sorry for those who have never cried out, 'God, where are you?'"
Mm.
That was how Winnie did. That was her practice. That came from her practice. And so this is why these people. So this is concomitantly how if we want to go deep, this is how we get there. We got to step with them. We got to walk like they walk. We got to organize. We got to love the people that are cast out. We got to take stands that are right, but make us unpopular and inconvenient
Yes, sir.
for those who are the lovers of empire and its collaborators. So that's what Dr. King was saying.
Mm.
I've been there. God allowed me to look over. He says, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. And baby, don't we have some difficult days ahead with this MAGA stuff and the voter suppression and all the things? And he said, doesn't matter with me now. I'm not worried about anything.
Mm.
I'm not fearing any man.
Mm.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And I'm following him to see that glory and to work with the people so that that prayer we pray all the time on earth as it is in heaven, so that can really happen.
Mm.
Thank you.
A journey of revolutionary change certainly is what these two ancestors embarked on. And thank you, Reverend Hassan and Reverend Mackenzie, for just kind of giving us a glimpse, holding together for us, if you will, proximity to the divine and proximity to people, really moving us into this second part of being at this intersection of revolutionary change, of this journey of revolutionary change, and what could happen if these two ancestors connect and hang out. Now we know that Martin had a great sense of humor too, loved basketball and watching sports. So he so they held together hope and humor, right? And I think that's how they were able to just maintain their humanity, around that. But they're getting together at this intersection. We are there. You've kind of taken us real deep, into it, and a lot of things are now, rolling about now. Proximity, right? What does it mean to be purpose-driven, right? What about beloved community? What about Ubuntu, Sawubona? I've seen the promised land, is what you were talking about. And that's because he has seen, he was in Memphis, and he has seen the pain, right, of God's people, walking around, and marching with signs saying, I am a man, Reverend Mackenzie, in terms of who we are, right? And work hard to reclaim our value and our dignity because of the similar struggle against schemes and systems perpetuated by white supremacy and Christian nationalism. They're getting together now. They're getting together now. So Reverend Mackenzie, what as they check in with each other, what do you think we could hear them sharing about their purpose-driven, vocationally inspired, divine guided journey of revolutionary change? Reverend Mackenzie, as you do so, we're asking folk if you have any questions. Our team, they're monitoring, the chat for any questions, because we're going to get to that, before we close up. But Reverend Mackenzie, can you kind of help us get a sense of what these two ancestors will be, chatting about, after they probably, giggled a little bit, right? As the bishop would, he has that infectious giggle, but your thoughts?
Just having been so, Pastor Hassan, I just thank you. I am not going to even imagine what it is that they are saying. I have this real sense of, they say that we are resting now. Our work is done. That's my, just personally, there isn't a worry, there isn't, because it's like we passed the baton. We've done the work when and where the work was supposed to have been done. That's my, not in terms of Dr. King, because I never knew, but for me, like the old man, that's what I would say. He would sit back and kick back and say, I'm done, and not look back with any regret or any remorse or any, and just being grateful that God could take him. And maybe the conversation would be, isn't God great that God could take two ordinary men and through them do something very extraordinary. And I think that they would be sitting there not talking about them, but giving thanks to the God who called them, the God who equipped them, and the God who is constantly still present. And so in the same way that they were unselfish, and like Dr. Hassan also said, not into celebrity status or anything, but constantly pointing us to what is eternal, and that's the divine. And my sense is we see through a mirror dimly, but they are seeing God face to face. And I think that there is just a sense of gratitude. Somebody's saying, why do you think Tutu lived a long life?
We'll get to that.
Sorry. So that's just what I would, in the same way as on earth, as they pointed us to God, in the presence of God, they are focusing on God and giving thanks to God for taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary, for taking the common and the secular and making it sacred and holy and sanctified. And so,
yeah,
that's what
Reverend Hassan, the same question as these two ancestors now connect with each other. They never met in this life, but they're meeting now in the afterlife. What kind of conversation, what kind of conversations, would they be having, sharing, this similar vocation that they had against, a struggle for the common good, yet there was no sameness in what happened in South Africa and in the United States, right? So we ought to never try to confuse that, right? But there's a deep sense of similarity. Your thoughts on what they would, converse about?
A couple of things have occurred to me. One might be, and this is something maybe, one of Martin's regrets. I'm not sure how this worked out exactly in Bishop Tutu's life, but there probably are some parallels. Is what happens to the family, right? Both of them were very active persons, and I've seen documentaries when sometimes Martin would be packing to go, and the children would come and get on the car so we couldn't drive away because, they missed him, and, he wasn't able to be with them as he maybe wanted to, and certainly not as they would have had him had they had their choice. But they had, they made a sacrifice. He made a sacrifice around that. Mm-hmm. How that showed up in Bishop Tutu's life, I'm not really sure. I don't know enough to say, but I think that may be one of the conversations about their life, and maybe their wishes for how things may have been differently for their families and their participations in their children's lives, and maybe even in the relationships they had with their partners. Another thing that occurs to me comes from something that Pope Francis wrote during Lent in 2015, and he's talking about this connection, right, between heaven and earth, and how part of the responsibility of those in heaven is to keep the door open between heaven and earth, after they reside there. And he was saying that indifference has become a cancer in the religious life today. And sister mentioned that, you know, Bishop Tutu didn't suffer from compassion fatigue, but Pope Francis finds this a reality in the religious life of many who have come to focus less and less on the needs of the poor and the needy, and more on their own. And that one of the reasons that people celebrate in heaven is that they are no longer indifferent to the needs of those, because they are connected to them, and they actually, once in heaven, commit themselves to the freedom struggles on earth. Until those things come to fruition, he said something to the effect, as long as there is one still suffering on earth, the people in heaven cannot completely rest.
Right.
And he quotes this this French Catholic we call doctor of the church, Teresa of Lisieux, who said, "Upon my death, a bouquet of roses will be let loose upon the earth, and I will spend my eternity sharing love on earth from heaven." And so I think about that, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were busy doing it now.
Great. Well, we invite folks to really check out some of the resources that were mentioned. Reverend Hassan, that video you mentioned, I want to certainly check that video out. And I believe we're going to try and put that in the chat somewhere. Please, if you can, read the entire, speech. And I'm not going to even call it the I Have a Dream speech, Reverend Hassan. We'll just call it the speech, as you said. Read it entirely. Very, very important.
Yes, please do.
Of the essence, of the struggle that Dr. King, embodied and inspired around that. And then also, while you're at it, also read the letter from Birmingham jail, you see, because in that letter, for me at least, he talks about this whole deep sense of a spirituality of mutuality, right? And juxtapose it, with, a spirituality of otherization, right? And then of course, the writings of Archbishop Tutu. We want to take a little bit of time just for some questions and get your response to that, and then we're going to ask you to just share some final thoughts. And I want to give our Black Women for Wellness staff about 10 minutes or so for announcements and other sharing that they would want to have. The first question that came in that I want to quickly lift up is this, and that is, why do you think Archbishop Tutu lived a long life while King was assassinated, given that they both had liberation theologies? They were both, of course, resisting violent regimes that made a huge investment in violence, and sometimes that violence start with a violation of people's human dignity, right? So any thoughts just around the longevity? There were several attempts, of course, on both their lives, but any thoughts on that? Reverend Hassan, maybe you can start with us. Any thoughts on that?
Well, as Reverend Vanessa said, there were several attempts made on Bishop Tutu's life that were unsuccessful. And certainly that probably is one of the reasons why he lived much longer than Dr. King. One of the things that happened, though, in the United States was the FBI was waging war against the Black freedom movement. And there was a program in the FBI called the Counterintelligence Program. And the Counterintelligence Program was designed by Director J. Edgar Hoover. And its purpose was to prevent the rise, quote unquote, of a Black Messiah who could electrify and unify Black people for the struggle for freedom. And so all kinds of dirty tricks. And so the directive was to disrupt, discredit, and neutralize people who might fit this bill. And they actually gave a list of names, which included people like Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., H. Rap Brown. And so the FBI went on a program of placing informants and FBI agents in organizations, fomenting discord and distrust among people in these organizations, framing up people on false charges, setting people up for assassinations. Many of the Black Panthers were killed as a result of this program. People in other organizations, the same thing happened. Many folks had to go underground and leave the country because their lives were in danger. And you know, the Black Panthers as an organization eventually ceased to exist because of these kinds of things. And we know now that they were FBI informers very close to Dr. Martin Luther King, who were who were providing reports and information on him to the FBI. And so he was a victim of COINTELPRO. And that was one of the reasons why both he and Malcolm did not live beyond their 39th year.
So a clear sense of intentionality. Reverend Mackenzie, any thoughts from you around longevity, safety, security, quality of life, you know, for these two ancestors as part of their common struggle, you know, against oppression and repression?
As a South African, we don't have a history of assassination of our leaders as in the United States. The only one that I remember, and you can probably remember too, was Verwoerd, who was stabbed in the thing. And then Chris Hani, that was killed. So I am hesitant to talk about it, but I think historically, that's a curse that is here. And I don't know if curse is the appropriate word, but as you go back to the history of the United States, it didn't start with the assassination of Dr. King. It had gone, you know, many decades before. And I think it's sort of that Steve Biko, I'm sorry, somebody saying Steve Biko there, sorry. I could remember Verwoerd and Chris Hani, Steve Biko, thank you. And thankfully it's what we can, it's not, because even if it's one is more than enough. And so that I think it's my heart is telling me it's a false equivalency in terms of saying we only had 2 and you had 20. I mean, just the fact that there is an attempt to disrupt and discredit and neutralize, and thinking because you silence a voice, you silence the struggle, and you silence the will of the people and stuff like that. So I think that I don't want to say I don't know. It's God's choice and God's decision. Now this is the thing. I mean, it's not God's choice what happened to Dr. King, but I don't think I can say why Tutu lived as long as he lived. It was a gift of grace for him. And when I get to heaven, that's the question that I think I'm going to ask God.
Indeed. Because I mean, both countries, very, very violent, right? Not just legislatively, not just systemically, but I mean, both countries heavily invested, of course, in that trifecta, or those triplets, you know, Reverend Hassan, you know, that had militarism or violence at the heart of it, you know.
Yeah.
So true, brother. Let me ask you to maybe, you know, final thoughts. The three of us know, and many of us probably that join know the hymn, A Charge to Keep, right? A charge to keep. I have
God's glory.
Ancestors, you know, hang out at the intersection. They probably sharing their journey of revolutionary change, both internally, externally, globally. What would they charge us with for such a time as this? South Africa, the most unequal country, in the world right now. Democratic, of course. That's what Archbishop Tutu and that great generation has bequeathed us. Caught up in the moral crisis of gender-based violence and femicide, continuing to deal with corruption, of course. In the United States, this ongoing threat to a multiracial democracy by white supremacy, as well as Christian nationalism, having come together. What would they charge us with, for such a time as this? Just some concluding thoughts around some calls to action from them to us as we take up the baton. Reverend Vanessa, you want to go first? Okay, go ahead, Reverend Hassan.
Oh, okay, thank you. As I had mentioned before, the last project that Dr. King committed himself to was the Poor People's Campaign, and there actually is a reiteration of that, of course, that is being led by the Reverend Dr. William Barber, the Poor People's Campaign for a Moral Revival. And I'm sure Dr. King will charge us to find ways, if not to actually work in the campaign, to support the efforts to address the needs of the most marginalized in our society, which in many cases does turn out to be Black women and children. So, this is right up the ministerial alley of Black Women for Wellness. I think also it's very important as we look at the campaign of voter suppression that has roared out of the results of the 2000 presidential election, which threatened to take away the rights to the ballot that we won through the civil rights movement. Definitely is a space that I'm sure Dr. King would be charging us to get involved with and to move forward on. And I think also, as far as a kind of global view of solidarity and mutual support, that we have had decades of support of our folks in South Africa. We have certainly assisted and supported them in the bringing down of apartheid. And now, there certainly is need for us to continue to reach across the globe to one another, because there are certainly issues of gender-based violence in our community, of corruption in our community, and of violence. And so I think it would be, the two of them would behoove us, right, to act in Ubuntu, right? I am, because we are both here and there and across from here to there, to be able to go forward in a good way as people of faith, but just people who are children of God, if faith is not our primary vehicle. All of us are important, because certainly Black lives matter to God, because God made all of them.
Thank you. Reverend McKenzie, any thoughts from you in terms of a charge from the Arch and Reverend King?
There's a French Jesuit priest and philosopher, I'm sure we've heard about him, Teilhard de Chardin, who says love is the most universal, the most tremendous, the most mystical of cosmic forces. And one of the readings at the funeral for the Arch was 1 John 4, 7 and 8, beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God, and those who loves knows God, and those who does not love does not know God. And so that love becomes, as my colleague just said, faith is not the impetus. It is love that, as Pastor Kamal said, it is love that becomes the driving force. It is love that undergirds. It is love that threatens. It is love that challenges us, that convicts us, that transforms us, that renews us, that helps us to keep on keeping on. It is because we love one another that we would want to know that we are in this together. We know that in life, I think this is what he would say, we are not all in the same boat, but we certainly all in the same storm. And that it is the love of God that will undergird us, and not as a superficial optimism, but as a real, genuine anchoring and a gravitas into God and the divine, and knowing that love, it is love that enables us to be and to do. And I think that's for me what they say.
Yeah. Vanessa McKenzie, rector of the Church of the Advent here in Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Reverend Hassan, who is the Minister of Word and Sacrament at the Sojourner Truth Presbyterian Church in Richmond, California. Thank you both so much for just kind of going deep, sharing from your hearts, and much prayer to you for your ongoing embodiment of this, Tutu MLK, spirit. For indeed, they were grounded in a revolutionary love that fueled their vocation to commit themselves to the liberation of all people. This love does not necessarily, allow anyone who violates it, to get away. It is a love that is about accountability.
Yes.
It is a love that calls for transparency. It is a love that seeks to, maintain human dignity. And so we ought not to mistake this agape revolutionary love that was at the heart of the lives of these two men, with the other expressions of love, erotica, and otherwise, around it. So I think that's very, very important, to realize. One of the lessons that Bishop Tutu taught me as a young man in South Africa, when we were getting so disillusioned and really felt, as he would put it, like we are pariahs or pawns in our own country, and therefore didn't have no sense of belonging. He would say to us, as we were struggling as teenagers between identity, ability, and destiny, he said the following to us, when we were getting ready to march in Johannesburg. He said, you are because you belong. I am because I belong. And so belonging, bold belonging, was at the heart of it, and that belonging is grounded in mutuality. It's grounded in beloved community. It's grounded in Ubuntu. It's certainly grounded in Sawubona, as we see each other, as we seek each other out, and as we facilitate, our ongoing spiritual resistance to the schemes and the systems that seek to violate, our human dignity and the integrity, of creation. So we are grateful for this opportunity. May we continue to embody, take the baton from these two ancestors, fight indifference, and see how we can continue to facilitate God's beloved world house. Thanks so much, Black Women for Wellness, Sisters at 8. It's been a joy as always. And I now turn it back over to the team for some announcements and some closing words as we move forward.
Thank you, Pastor Sauls. I appreciate you curating the conversation, and it's been some lessons learned. So before we hit that 10:30 mark, I put in the chat, if you are, if any of our guests, Pastor Sauls, Pastor Hassan, Pastor Vanessa, Mackenzie. If you all have social media handles, if you all have websites that you want us to follow so we know where you're speaking next, your next event, etc., please drop them in the chat and we'll be sure to share them out because yes, we will post this on Facebook so people can listen a little bit later on. A lot of times when listening to things, we're caught up in the discussion. We have to go back to hear some of the gems that have been dropped or some of the many resources and references that have been used. So just go ahead and drop your social media handles and your websites in the chat so people who want to follow you are able to do that. Last thing I wanted to say, just in terms of the conversation and where we ended on this concept of love. And it is such a powerful one because love is how we're going to win. It is why we are going to win. And it is not to be confused with that Hollywood wimpy concept of love, because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a fierce action that empowers us. It gives us strength from our ancestors to share with our descendants. So please keep that in mind, that when we, at least when I think of you all talking about this concept of love, it is not about that Hollywood romance type of notion. It is about for our people, for our community, for God, for the goddess, whatever. And it is fierce and it is strong. It sees and it is accountable. It's not one of those, you know, we forgive. I'm not saying sorry, blah, blah, blah. That's not it. I'm going to move on because tomorrow is the actual anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther King Jr. So I want to, Keisha, if you can hold the music for 1 second, please. Thank you. I just want to say you will see some of the things that are going on with Black Women for Wellness today at noon. If you want to stick around, come back rather. We are having a Kitchen Divas workshop. Kitchen Divas is about food, is a health and well-being. And given the pandemic we are in, one of the best things you can do is build your immunity system with good food, with great food, with cooking, and nourishing your body. The other thing that we are doing to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday is tomorrow in Leimert Park, where our primary office is. We are having a pop-up. You'll be able to get a vaccine. You'll be able to get a booster. You'll be able to get tested. And that's what we're doing because our community, we are catching this virus, like is serious contagion going on. So we are trying our best to help our community in every way we can. You will also be able to get personal protective gear, right? So for the gloves, the masks, the face shields, those type of things, we'll have some of that stuff available tomorrow also. So that is our effort in terms of helping keep our community safe and giving us the tools and the information we need to remain safe. So so Kitchen Divas later on today via Zoom. Tomorrow, backs up in the Leimert Park with us. The King Day Parade has been canceled, if any of you all did not know that. So we'll figure that one out too. Thank you for joining Black Women for Wellness today. Thank you, Keisha, for keeping it technically on point. We appreciate you. Thank you, Alexis and Antoinette, for doing all the legwork and logistics. Y'all make it happen. Thank you, Kim, for connecting us with our Stockton office and also with the work that the partnerships that we're having in Kenya and doing that Pan-African World News Hot Topics today. I appreciate y'all. Once again, my name is Jan Robinson Flint. You've been in tune with Sisters at 8, Black Women for Wellness. We will be back again second Friday of the month via Zoom. to talk about what we want to talk about, because Sisters at 8 is about what Black Women for Wellness and the Black community wants to talk about, regardless of Facebook that gave me challenges this morning, and regardless of all those other little devils that interfere with us. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Reverend Sauls. Thank you, Reverend Mackenzie. Peace out.
Emabhaceni kangiqomi kwaZulu ngoba ngiqome emabhaceni kangiqomi kwaZulu ngoba ngiqome emabhaceni ngiqomi kwaZulu ngoba ngiqome emabhaceni